All right, so I'm recording. I'll say again, there is a test in a week on Flask. It is, you can use your labs, the labs you wrote, the files I wrote, anything you find on the internet, just not interact with another person. 75 minutes plus the 5 minutes you can squeeze out of me. The people who come to, there is some setup on the computer. And so the people, if you bring your own laptop, great. If you are using, if you come to class regularly and have sort of established, I sit here, then that's fine. The people who only come in for tests, you have to make sure you're not in somebody's regular seat. Okay, because there is a setup and I want the people who've set it up on a particular computer to have access to that computer in which they set things up on. All right, labs 8 through 15 are eligible for full credit. And if I get them before the end of the day next Thursday, and same for homeworks 5 and 6, all the old stuff is still worth 90. So there's still lots of points that you're eligible for. All right, so that's where things stand. I'm going to go over our second thing that is not on the, so I think I'm on lab 17. That's the second SQLAlchemy example. Then I'm going to go over some examples today. So on Tuesday, we're starting to write code that enters stuff in the database, that sort of enters things, inserts things in the database for us, and queries the database for us. And our first example was a single table. So today we'll be going beyond that, that single table. Are there any questions before I go on to today's example? No. Thank you for shaking your head no to respond to me in some way. All right, so let me get all these people out of the way. All right, and all right, so here we are. Okay, so the first thing is, I'm not going to watch this video, but there is this video, and what we did on Tuesday was when we made the database, which just had one table, we made what's called an in-memory database. But today we're going to make, we're going to save the database, and it's going to be not just in memory, but it will be in a file somewhere. And database files have data and metadata, and you just can't simply open up the database file and have it be sort of meaningful. And there's a Visual Studio Code extension that will help us look at our SQLite databases. So that's what this is. This little video is about. It's not my video. It's OOP Coder's video. But mainly it is the first step. I can show you the first step for now. And so I open up to, it is an extension. So here in Visual Studio on the left-hand side, there is this extensions. So if I click on extensions, I can then search, and there is a SQLite extension. Where is it? How many L's in SQLite? I don't know. There it is, SQLite. Only one L in SQLite. There is this Alex CVZZ. This is somebody who's given us a way to view a SQLite database here in Visual Studio. So you can tell by the gear that I've already got it installed. But so if you're at your computer, then you'll want to install that. Just if you have a blue button install, then click it and install that. And that's how we'll be able to sort of look at the database and say like, oh yes, I have one table, I have two tables, I have records in the tables. It'll allow us to look at the database. Okay. So that's the first thing I have under today. Was that video. Okay. Now, next I have some code zipped up. And we want to move to the, on Tuesday, we had a database, we wrote SQLAlchemy code that established a database for us that had one table, and today we move on to two tables that have a relationship. So I'm copying this. I'm going to put that in documents in 341 in, I think I called it SQL 2. I think that's where I'm putting it. And then I'm going to paste it in there. I am not going to click. No, I wanted it in the VENV. My apologies. Don't put it there. Put it in the VENV. That makes more sense. There it is in the VENV. I am not going to open the file externally. I'm not going to open it in Visual Studio from here. That was what you were doing, I think. I'm going to open Visual Studio to my VENV, and then that file will be available in my Explorer, and that's how I will open it. So File, Open Folder. I'm over in Flask. I was grading somebody's something last night, but this was SQL 2 and VENV, and I'm selecting the folder. So it makes a difference in Visual Studio Code whether you open a folder and look at files in that folder or whether you open a file. So I've opened the folder. Now in the, let me collapse this source control. Now in my Explorer, here is app art. Okay. So there we go. Okay. So this is our second time looking at SQLAlchemy, or maybe we had two examples on Tuesday, so maybe this might be our third. But here is the game. I have information about painters and information about paintings. So that in our database is two entities. There will be a painter entity, there will be a painting entity. And in this case, there will be also in the database tables. There will be a painter table, there will be a painting table. There is a relationship between the painters and the paintings, that a painter paints paintings. In databases, we like to know the nature of the relationship. And we talk about, is the relationship one-to-one? Is it one-to-many? Is it many-to-many? So we want to establish the nature of the relationship between the two entities, because that determines how many tables there are going to be and how we functionally get the relationship established. This relationship is a one-to-many relationship. And I'm going to assume this. I'm going to assume that a painter paints many paintings. I will insist when we get to projects and so on, I will insist you do this. So let me sort of establish this habit from the beginning. I have painters and paintings, and I want to know what's the nature of the relationship. And so I'm going to state the relationship in both directions. I'm going to always start with A. Let me make this font bigger. And let me also view page source. Okay, so A painter, I'll just say creates many paintings. So I start with A. I start the relationship. I state the relationship in both directions. And I always start with the word A. A painter creates many paintings. Then a painting, now I have to state the relationship in the other direction, and I always start with A. A painting is created by, and this is an assumption here, one painter. We're allowing no collaborations. There's one, at least, main painter. If, sometimes in studios, there's some assistant who might help make the painting, but there's one, and this is an assumption on our part, there's one primary painter responsible for the painting. That's how our data is going to be. So if you do this, again, I can't say, oh, well, many painters. No, that's not the way it works. You always start with A. A painter creates many paintings. A painting is created by one painter. Then I have a one-to-many relationship. Okay. What else? So a one-to-many relationship is established by a foreign key. One of our main principles of databases is that things should be, we talk about it being atomic, that there shouldn't be imagine like some kind of a spreadsheet or something with the information of the database. So there'll be records in the database with different fields. And in a given field in a database, so for a record, a field of that record should have one thing in it. So I can put in the painting record, I can put a foreign key establishing the painter, because for the painting, there's one painter. So I can have, so the painting will have a foreign key, which will connect it to the painter. I can't do that the other way around, because the painter paints many paintings. So in my database, this is because of the way I've written this relationship and the way my data is going to be. It's a one-to-many relationship. And the part of the relationship with the one, that's the table, that's the entity that has a foreign key. Now we will have projects where I say, here's what I want, and you'll get it right. There'll be projects where I say, you do your own, and sometimes you'll get it right and sometimes you'll get it wrong. And then I'll say, do a project. And this is one of the things people tend to get wrong on the project. And it really doesn't belong to this course. It belongs to the prerequisite of this course, but people are sort of overconfident in their knowledge of database. They like, I know what I'm doing. I got an A in database, and then they do it wrong. And you will lose points on my project if you do this wrong. And even if you do it right, but you don't express it the way I want it expressed, and this is the way I want it expressed, you'll lose points. So you have to, this is one of the things where I'm usually pretty lenient, and so long as anything's logical and makes sense, I'm happy with it. This is one of those things that if you don't do it my way, you're going to lose points. Okay. So now we know the relationship. It's painter to painting. We know that it's a one-to-many relationship, and we know that the part of the relationship, the paintings have one painter, then that is where the foreign key goes. And that's already here, just in my imports. I'm going to have, most of this is old stuff. Who's the new stuff here? We've seen column before, we've seen integer before, we've seen string before. Foreign key, that's new. Because we never had a relationship before, so we never had a foreign key. And down here, here's another new thing in the imports. We're saying that there's going to be a relationship. So those are two new things. Here is, in the beginning, I'm working still with an in-memory database, but if I comment out 8 and uncomment 7, then I will be making an actual database. Okay. So this is foreign key, that's new. Relationship, that's new. Here's a painter class. I have a painter class. I'm extending the a class that was made by SQLAlchemy, and so that's what we mean by base. That I'm extending an already existing class, and I'm making painter. It corresponds to a table painters with a small p and an s. That's going to be the name over in the database. I have an ID, which is the primary key. So painters are going to have an ID. It's an integer. It's the primary key. I'm going to have a last name, which is a string, a first name, a country, a birth date, and a death date. Okay. There is a date type in databases, which I'm not going to use. What you have to understand in computer science, they have dates, and the dates are down to like the milliseconds. So they, they have dates, and then they have date times, and the date times are down to milliseconds. And so they go back, dates go back, depending on how it's being done. Sometimes the dates only go back to like the 1970s. Sometimes the dates go back to like the 20th century, like 1901 or something like that. But dates don't go back to even into the 18 somethings. And some of my artists, I think most of my artists are from, the 1800s. So dates don't go back that far. Computer dates don't go back that far. So I can't use very easily anyway, computer dates. So I'm just going to have my dates as strings. Okay. So these old dates would wreak havoc. So we're just going to leave them as strings. And I'm not going to do any calculating. I'm not going to tell you for how long, Edward Manet has been dead. I don't care. So I'm not doing anything with dates with them as dates. I just want to show them to you. So string is good enough. And here I'm using, so this is the painter class. I have mostly just normal fields. And this is not a field, but this is me in code sort of saying, I'm going to have a relationship to paintings. So that's not a field in the database. These were fields in the database. 23 through 28, they are fields in the database. You will see when we look at the database, IDs and last names and first names and countries and birth dates and death dates. The relationship is more of a thing in code. It's going to make querying easier to say there's a relationship of painter to painting. But don't expect to see anything in the database here. This is more, remember what we're doing in SQLAlchemy is managing the database for us. And so this is a management thing. that it's telling us while you're managing for me, please manage this relationship between painters and paintings so that my life will be easier. But when we open up the database and look at it, you won't see anything corresponding to this. It's not in the database, it's in the SQLAlchemy's managing of our relationship to the database. All right. Second class, painting. Table name, paintings. ID, integer primary key. We want a primary key. That's a good database thing to always have a primary key. It does not have to be integer, but it can be integer. And the nice thing about integer is that it can then auto increment. So you can be responsible for your own IDs, but you can also let the computer handle it and auto increment. But to auto increment, then you better have an integer. So I'm going to do auto incrementing, so I'll have an integer. There's a title of the painting. I have a file name for the painting. And I have, this is an actual field in the painting table. This is a field. It is, so that's why it says column here. That means it's a real field in the database. And it's going to be an integer because it's going to relate to the ID of the painter. So this is going to be painters.id. One thing that gets confusing here is we have code, we have classes, and we have things that correspond to database. So we have entities or tables and databases, then we have code. And this painters.id is a table thing. So when I'm saying something's a foreign key and it's what am I connecting to, it is connecting to a table. Okay, so I'm not saying I'm connecting to painters, the class, I'm connecting to painters.id, which is a field within the table. Okay. That gets confusing. You say later on when when I'm not blathering on about it, you may have a tendency to write painter there, but it's painters.id with a small p, and that's the name of the table. Okay. That is my schema. That is my database. I have two entities. They have a one-to-many relationship. That one-to-many relationship is established here in the database by having a foreign key in the painting table. This thing up here is nothing to do, it's not nothing to do with the database, but it is more of a code thing. This is more about SQLAlchemy in Python. This is actually seen in the database. Here's our normal stuff that we always have: create, session, start a session. Okay. Here I am hard coding the creation of a painter. So I'm making Edward Manet, who is from France and has this birth date and that death date, and I add him to my table and I flush. So that's not quite the same as commit. Commit means, okay, finally establish it in the database and have it. Flush is not quite as strong as commit, but what flush does is says, next thing I'm going to do is make some paintings, and paintings should have a painter, the foreign key. And so I'd better know the ID of that painter that I just made, and that's what flush does. Flush says, put it enough in the system, maybe the computer's memory, over here on the SQLAlchemy side rather than over in the pure committed database side, but at least establish for me an ID for this painter so then I can establish my relationships for the paintings. That's the flush. Okay, so I have a painting. I'm using my painting class. Here's the title, Le Déjeuner c'est l'heure. Here is the file name, déjeuner.jpg. And then that's all I put in here, the title and the file name. Then I'm saying that painting's painter ID is a painter. So this is a painting. This is a painter. I'm taking the foreign key, painter underscore ID, and making it the ID of that painter I just made. So Le Déjeuner sur l'heure was made by Edward Manet. And then here are other paintings, other paintings, other paintings, and then I commit. So it's not in the database until I commit. So I'm committing Edward Manet and his paintings in one commit, but I did have to do this little intermediate flush to establish his ID so I could use it in the relationship. Questions? No, he never has any questions, but at least he bothers to shake his head. Okay, so then I can query the database and look at the painter. There's only one at this stage, but I say first because in general, a query can give you a list of things, a list of records. This is going to be the first record, and I'm going to show you information about the painter. Then I'm doing another query, this time on the painting table, but I'm using a filter where the painting has a painter ID of 1, which was my one artist, Edward Manet. So this is like, we're not writing SQL. SQLAlchemy writes the SQL for us, but this is like select star from painting where painter ID is equal to 1. So this filter is like a where clause and query is like a select star. So select star from painting where the painter ID is 1. I'm going to look at all of the paintings. I'm going to loop through them. I'm going to show you the title, the file name, and the painting ID. I'm putting this right now into an in-memory database, so it's going to go away, which is good because next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write, I think, the data from a file, and I don't want to overwrite Edward Manet again. So that's why I'm still in memory. So I ran it, and here is my first query. Edward Manet is from France. And here is my second query over the paintings. And ID was 1, the title was Déjeuner sur l'heure, the file name was déjeuner.jpg, and the painter ID was 1. That's my ID for Edward Manet, and so on. Questions? No. All right, so next version. I'm going to read a file and use the reading of the file to put the information in the database. You've already seen this data file. I think, yes, I think you've seen this data file. Okay. I'm getting it. I have a JSON file with these artists in it. Okay, close that. So now I have a data file that's in static, so I have a little more structure, not too much more structure. Documents 341, I'm working in SQL 2, I'm working in the VENV, I'm pasting. Okay, and I just overwrote app art. but now I should see some JSON-y stuff. I see some JSON-y stuff. Okay, so here in static and data, I have painting. I have a, let me format it, make it look a little nicer. I have, let me use my Python language here. I've got a dictionary with a property painters, which is a list, and it's a list of dictionaries. And that dictionary has properties like last name, first name, country icon, country name, birthday, death date, and paintings. The paintings property is a list of dictionaries which have properties, title, and file. So there's a list within a list. Okay, as I say, you've seen this data before. All right. So the table is going to be the same. So establishing the database is the same. There's the foreign key, there's the relationship. I'm still in memory. There's the painter table. There's the painter class and the painters table. That's the same as what we just looked at. Here's the painting class, the paintings table, and that's the same. Here's establishing the session. That's the same. Oh, here's the JSON. I'm going to use JSON. I'm going to use the operating system. I'm making sure that I'm running in the, I'm at least imagining myself running in the location on the computer where this code is. So I find the real path of this file and just get its directory and make that the current directory. And then I know relative to where the Python is, I'm in static, I'm in data, I'm in JSON underscore data dot, or painting underscore data dot JSON. And I load up that JSON. So now I have dictionaries and lists within dictionaries and so on. I am walking through, I think when I did this when I did it just as a Python example, I was doing something with the counter. So my loop has a counter. I don't need the counter. I don't think I need the counter, but I was using the counter the previous time, and I just copied my loop from the previous time. So I don't think I need this enumerate, but I have it. So I'm looking at the painters in art. I'm looping over them. I have a counter I. I'm not sure that I use it. I have an artist. I'm using the painter class. I'm making a painter with last name, first name, country, birth date, death date. Okay, I add the painter, I flush. Flushing again establishes the ID for me, because now I have a nested loop, and now I'm looping over the paintings. Here I am using art painters I, but I could just as well right here say, what did I call it above? Artist. So this could just as well be artist. And I'm looking at the paintings of that artist, and I'm using that to establish a painting, and then establishing the relationship between the painting and the painter, and I'm adding the painting. And then when I'm done all that looping, when I have all my artists and all their paintings, I commit. So that's the new part, reading the file and using that data so I have a lot more records. Here's a query. I'm querying the painter table. I'm picking out the ID that is 2. That's my second painter. That might be Georges Seurat, I think. So I have a second painter. So I am writing a query. I'm filtering out on the second painter. Even so, I am, even though I know my query is only going to produce one painter, I say first, because in general, queries give you a list of things, and I'm establishing that I only want one, and I'm printing out the information. So this will give me the information on my second painter. Here I am looping over the paintings for my second painter. So this is painting for the second painter. I'm looking at all of them. I'm showing you. And so that's basically what I did before. Okay. I haven't used the relationship quite yet. That will be in the next version. Are we okay? Let's run it and see if it works. So there is that first query. My painter is Georges Seurat. And here is the paintings. And the paintings, 5 of the paintings were Edward Manet's. So Georges Seurat's paintings start with an ID of 6 and go up to 11. And I'm showing you his titles and his file names. And that I'm going with painter ID 2. Any questions? No. So all I added was, instead of hard coding, adding some data, I have read a file to add the data. So I'm not hard coding the data in my code. I'm reading it from a data file. I still had to know what the I had to know what the properties in the data file were. So I'm not completely reading blind. But if you had switched the data from Edward Manet to Pablo Picasso, this code would still run. So it sort of separates the data in the JSON file from the code, but I still need to know the field names. Okay. And we ran it, and I'll ask if there are any questions. So one more version, I'm going to do some slightly fancy querying. I'm going to take advantage of that relationship. And then I'm going to show you what you have to do, which is basically the same. So where am I at? Documents 341. What was I? SQL2, V and V. Paste. Okay. Now, what do I have? What did I change? I still have the foreign key. I still have the relationship. I am now going to write the database. I didn't want to keep overwriting a database. I would have Edward Manet over and over again. So I had it while I was sort of working. I was working in an in-memory database, but now I'm a little more ready to say I'm finalized what I want. So now I am writing the database. You can write the database and then delete it. So if you write the database and then you realize, oh, I have stuff in there, but I need to sort of start again, you can just delete the database. It's not that hard. Okay. Painters, nothing changed. Paintings, nothing changed. Establish the session and so on. Read the JSON file, nothing different there. Here's my painter query, that's the same. Painting query, that's the same. Here are some newer queries taking advantage of the relationship. Okay. And the relationship, we'll show the relationship sort of in 2 ways. Okay. So here is my artist. I'm going to, I'm looping over the painter, getting Georges Seurat, who has the ID of number 2, and I'm printing out his information. So that we already did. That was nothing new. But that artist has a paintings relationship. You remember that way up here, way up here, way up here, way up here. No, even higher. The painter has, in here in line 29, a relationship to painting. Okay. I'm going to point this out one more time. In 29, this is the table, the painter table. It has a relationship to painting. This is capital P and is the class. And I remind you that that's distinct down here from the foreign key, which is establishing the relationship in a different way, in the different direction. And that is with a painter ID in the painting table. Okay, but right now, the query we're just looking at works with this relationship. So we queried a painter who has a relationship to paintings. And let's go down and look at that. Here is the second artist, George Seurat. I'm redoing him. This is what I already had, 96. But now I'm looking at the paintings that George Seurat has a relationship to. And there are many. And then I'm going to loop through them and show their titles. So this is not, I did not have this query previously, so this is the first. So when I say second artist redo, that is working with the relationship in artist. Okay. Then I have a query, painters from France. I could have done that before. That's not any big deal. I'm querying the painter table. I'm filtering, and I'm just saying, before I was filtering on the ID, but I can filter on other properties. You knew that. You've had a database course. I can filter on ID. I can filter on other things. So I'm filtering on the country this time. So Edward Manet was from France. George Seurat was from France. I have, I think, Gustav Klimt, he was from Austria. He's not from France. So we'll get only the French artists here. And then once I get all my French artists, I can loop over. Okay, so that's just a different filter than what we saw before. And here I'm querying over painters, but I'm going to go through all of them. And I'm doing a, using that relationship in a different way. So previously up here, I looked at paintings and I was sort of looping through it, listing Georges Seurat's paintings. But down here, I'm just working with the length of the painting. So I'm saying the, Edward Manet has 5 paintings in this database. Georges Seurat has 6 paintings in this database. So that's what this one is going to do. So I can get, if you remember from your database stuff, some counting. So, okay, so I'm going to work with some relationships. I'm going to work with some counting. I'm going to work with some where clauses, some filters that are other than IDs. So I'm just showing you more in the way of query. All right, let's run this sucker. All right. And what did we get? So here is second artist read. Here is my George Seurat information. And here's me exploiting that relationship and looping over and finding all the titles of those paintings. That would be a join, right? I would have to say, oh, here's the artist, and then go let me get the paintings with that painter. So I might, to have this information, George Seurat come out with this information Sunday afternoon on the island of Le Grand Jatte, that would be In SQL, that would be a join because I'm getting information from two different tables. Over here in SQLAlchemy, I'm just working on this relationship between two classes. Here's my artist from France, Manet, Seurat, Rousseau. And here is the number of paintings. So I can do sort of calculation-y things that SQL does these things, but I can also do them in SQLAlchemy just with a simple length. What's the length of the relationship? Edward Manet has 5 paintings, or Seurat 6, Henri Rousseau 2. This time I made the database. That's the other thing different in this third version. I made the database this time. You can see it right there. There's my art database. If I open that file, it's just going to be crazy looking. It's not even showing it to me because it's crazy looking. But now what am I doing? Oh, that is, I think I formatted my JSON. That's what that wants me to save. Okay, I'll save it. But now I want to do, I installed that extension for SQLite. I want to do, I think it's Control-Shift-P. Yes. So Control-Shift-P gets me a sort of a search for things I know how to do. And then I start to say SQLite, and I want to open a database. And it says, what database do I want to open? Well, in this virtual environment, then I'm running this in, the only database I have is art. So I'll say, yes, art, please. And then I need my Explorer back. And way down here is the SQLite Explorer. And there's my painters and paintings. And then I right click on one of the tables, paintings, and say show the table. And here is my table of painters. Manet, ID 1, last name Manet, first name Edouard from France, yada, yada. And paintings, show the table, right click, show the table, an ID for the painting, 1, a title, Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. I lost mine. How do I slide over? I don't know. But over, there must be more. There it is. There's the file name. And the paintings have the ID, the title, the file name, and the painting ID as the foreign key. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you for this example. What do you have to do? Same thing. Same thing, different data. So you come up with a one-to-many relationship. You can say that there are athletes play a position or something. So somebody plays a position, but many players play that position. So that would be a one-to-many. You could talk about movies having some principal genre. So Halloween is a horror movie. There are many horror movies. A movie has one genre, a genre has many movies in it. Pokemon has a type. I shouldn't even mention that because I'm so tired of Pokemon. But Pokemon has a type. So, you know, a Pokemon has a principal type. I don't know. I make it up, pretend I understand it. I don't. But that type of, there are many, that type has many Pokemon within it. So those would all be examples of one-to-many relationships. Make some data file that corresponds to that, or you can edit my data file to correspond to yours. write the base classes with the relationship, read the data file, and then do some querying. So basically just take my example, make it your example. Questions? No. All right, so stop recording.